Hey, that was such
Hi,
a victory. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Amber?
Very well, thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much for giving me opportunity to interview you for my YouTube channel and podcast and for internet.
Of course. Tell me a little bit about the inspiration of your channel because it's really interesting. You have folks from all different sorts of professions and walks of life, so I'm very curious about it.
Sure. Actually, I'm a technologist. I did masters in software engineering and bachelor's in computer science and engineering. So I was preparing for my PhD entrance. So there was a subject called computer networks where computers are interconnected with each other and the information transfer is happening. And I was trying to understand the communication system that has been created by human beings in those uh, computers. So I
Okay.
thought I thought this is the idea of a human being by understanding uh, humans networks and humans communication system. The communication happens in human relations, and I tried to create the same thing on my channel. That is a computer network. This is a human network, and in
Right.
this network you will see. More than 100 country human beings and 600 plus people. And my target is to do 4,000 plus videos. Right now, I did more than 100 country people interviews, also people from NASA, like
That's
uh,
amazing.
who works in NASA and who works in Amazon, Netflix, all the top companies in the world. I think I left is SpaceX. I'll interview somebody from SpaceX, which is a space related company.
Yes.
Uh,
That's very cool. If there's anyone in my network that you want to be connected to or any areas that you haven't hit that you think you might be interested in, let me know. And if I happen to know someone, I'm happy to make introductions.
Definitely. Uh, Firstly, your presence is extremely valuable for me. Thank you for being on my show, and I'm glad that you like my work.
I think it's very neat. I like it a lot. Thank you. Thank you for doing it. And thank you for having me on.
Thank you. It's an honor for me. Can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Oh, of course. My name is Amber D. Scott, and I'm the founder and CEO at Outlier Compliance Group. In a nutshell, we try to keep companies out of trouble. So we focus on anti-money laundering, privacy compliance, and regulatory compliance. We work with a lot of technology companies and technology startups, which is where I think the intersection between our worlds comes in.
So when you started this,
I started in 2013, and I think like most entrepreneurs, I would say that I was very angry when I started. There were things that I just didn't like about the status quo, about the way that consulting companies worked. I wanted to do things differently. I had ideas about how it could be done differently, a lot of which was very much technology enabled. And I realized that no one else was really going to do that for me. No one else was going to take these ideas and give them life. I either had to do them and see if they worked, or they would never happen. And 10 years later, it seems to be working okay.
awesome, you made it happen and it is out and humans are using it.
Yes.
Awesome. So you're from?
I'm from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is in Canada. I was originally born in Northern Ontario, and our offices now are in Toronto, also in Ontario. But I think the largest city in Canada by a fairly wide margin. So it tends to be our business center.
So you started when I was in bachelor's third year or second year. So putting these ideas in real world and making this happen. So from that first day to till today, where you have reached.
I think we've had some really big successes. So on the technology side, we've built online on-demand compliance modules for the dealers in precious metals and stones industry. And just to backtrack a little bit, if you're a regulated entity, you have to do certain things. So you have to have a compliance officer, you have to have policies and procedures, but it can't just be something that you say, okay, I wrote my name on the front of someone else's booklet of policies and procedures, but it's not really what I do. It's not really my business model. These things all have to be very tailored to your company. And this can be very complicated, especially for people that are kind of mom and pop businesses, that are smaller entities that have been, dealing in retail jewelry. And so they're selling necklaces to the public. They're not really used to the way of compliance in the same way that banks or other financial entities that have been regulated for a long time are. And so we wanted to create something that really let them have a simple interface. So we created a setup wizard. So basically they go online, they enter information about their business, about what their actual processes are. We tried to make as many menus as we could so that it would be less complicated, so that it wasn't as much as possible an open-ended question, but, check off which one of these things you do in this circumstance. And so that's been really good. And we've evolved that over the years, and worked very closely with the Canadian Jewelers Association. That's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of. That and I would say bothering the government for better transparency, which is a really funny thing to be proud of. But when I left my previous role, there were all of these things called policy interpretations that I had, which is basically you write to the regulator and you ask them for an opinion on something that's kind of a complex matter. So it's not something that's, easy peasy. I can look at the guidance and know what this is. It's something that's relatively complicated and nuanced. And they write back to you and they say, here's the right answer to this thing. And so in my previous role, I'd had a lot of these policy interpretations for common matters that I had access to. And you leave a role, you don't take any of your stuff with you, it stays with the previous company. And I thought, geez, it would be nice to have those because there's all of these things that I know, but I have to show my clients that I know them. I have to give them a reference point with the regulator, and I don't have that. And in fact, if I had that in my previous role, there's probably a lot of those that I just don't know about. And so I wrote to the regulator and I said, hey, I'm doing an access to information request, which is a thing that we can do in Canada. So it's an access to information and privacy request. You can do it with any government agency. Highly, highly, highly recommended if you think the government has some information that's not about an identifying individual. So it's not about information about a private individual, but about kind of government opinions and what the government is up to and what the rationale for things like that is of any government agency. So I wrote to FINTRAC, which is our anti-money laundering regulator, and I said, hey, I would like these policy positions that you've issued, and I'd like to know whether they're still current or not. So I want to know if they're still true. I'm not necessarily interested in the ones that are based on previous legislation, but I would like that. And they called me and they said, okay, this is a pretty big request, so we're going to ask you for some extra time on it. And I said, okay, no problem. You have the right to contest, so they have 30 days to answer this, and I was asking them for something really big, and they had to get their arms all the way around it. So they said, what are you going to do, Amber? Like, what do you want to do with this information? And I said, honestly, I think it's really useful across industries. And probably the right answer to that is that I'll publish it on my website. And I said, oh, you plan to make that public. That's an odd thing. We're going to get back to you. Let us call you back. And they called me back a couple of days later and they said, so we've determined that we have to grant your request. We'd like extra time to do it, but how would you feel if we published it on our website as the regulator? And I said, yes, I think you should be publishing it on your website. It's better if you do it than if I do it. And frankly, I think you should have been doing this for years. And so it actually has ended in a place where it's really front and central on the regulator's website now. If you go into guidance for industry, there's right in the middle of the page, policy interpretations, and they keep it up to date. And I think that's a funny thing to be the most proud of because it didn't really involve my work, but in the FINTRAC did all of the hard stuff in terms of pulling up those policy interpretations and getting them up on their website and keeping them up to date, which is a big task. But I think it's been so helpful to industry. And it's really, I think, helped the agency get to a place where they understand that kind of transparency and guidance is really important and helps companies do what they need to do. And it's been so helpful for startups because when you're starting out, you have all of these questions, and just being able to go to a database and do a search and find the right answer instead of trying to call government agencies and look through long, complicated documentation. It's amazing. It's been really helpful.
So who are using your service?
So for ourselves, generally anti-money laundering regulated entities. So we work with banks, we work with credit unions, money services businesses, and in Canada that includes cryptocurrencies, crypto assets. So any dealers in virtual currency. We've actually been dealing with that industry since 2013, which in retrospect seems crazy. And it wasn't because of any prescience on my part. A good friend of mine was running a payment processing company, and he called me and said, this Bitcoin exchange that I'm doing processing for has turned into a lot of my volume. I want to update my risk assessment. I want to include Bitcoin in that. I said, I don't know. I read about it in Wired. It seems really scammy. I'm an anti-money laundering compliance person. So I was very, very leery. I was very skeptical of Bitcoin. I didn't look at it and think, this is a great idea. I know what it is. I was skeptical and I didn't know how it worked. So way back then in 2013, I said, Peter, can you pay my retainer in Bitcoin? Because then this is going to force me to use Bitcoin. It'll force me to understand it, figure out how you convert it to Canadian dollars, figure out how you buy things with it, figure out what that looks like. And it was kind of down the rabbit hole from there. So we've happily served that industry. I think it's always fascinating. It's always exciting in terms of what's happening from a technology perspective and also what's happening from a regulatory perspective.
So what kind of problems that you are solving?
For us, it's generally helping companies to manage their risk. So no one wants to be the path of least resistance for fraudsters. If you run a company, you don't want fraudsters to be able to do transactions or other financial crime transactions to go through your company. So you want to manage your risk of financial crime, and then you also want to manage your regulatory risk. So you want to make sure that you're doing what you need to be able to do in order to operate your business in Canada.
So working for different businesses and which belongs to different industries, how is that?
It is. So it's fascinating. And this isn't just me alone. And I can't stress that enough. I have a team. And our company is called Outlier, based on Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outlier, that espouses the notion that to be really good at something, you have to practice it an awful lot. So everyone on our team has over 10,000 hours of in-house compliance experience. So they've been compliance officers at banks, at money services business, at payment companies. And now they're offering consulting services, but from that place of experience. And I think that's one of the things that really sets our team apart. In terms of the different industries, we try to really maintain industries where our team has deep experience. And so there are some industries that we don't work closely with, and it's nothing against those industries. It's that we don't have that same deep experience bench on our team.
So what is making you to wake up in the morning every day and do this?
I think working with entrepreneurs is so energizing. I realized this recently that I'm incredibly lucky in that I can legitimately say that I love our clients. I love what they're doing. I love the problems that they're solving. And it's exciting to be able to do something that empowers that makes their businesses stronger and more resilient and more compliant. We're problem solving every day, and I love that. It keeps me engaged.
So when you started this, when your idea came into the real world, have you thought that your thought and your energy and your intelligence is going to help a lot of businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs, and also the customers that they have?
I think what it's become is amazing and certainly exceeded my expectations in terms of when I started out. But that was always the goal. It was always to be able to work with entrepreneurs more ethically, to provide tools for entrepreneurs. Most of our consulting is fixed fee pricing, which is something that is near and dear to my heart. Just in terms of, we want to know how much something costs. If I buy a car, you don't tell me that the car is going to cost somewhere between $18,000 and $35,000. If you told me that, I'm not going to go to your car dealership because that's loony. I don't understand what I'm paying and I don't have the ability to plan for it. And I think a lot of consulting projects can be much more like that, where once you give me the specs, once I understand exactly what the scope is, I should be able to tell you what the cost of those items are. And that should be clear and that should be transparent. Similarly, within our team, we have a very radically different payment model than most consulting firms, which is that everyone receives a share of revenue for the projects that they work on. It's super transparent within our team. So everyone knows what everyone else is earning on a project. There is always a conversation about that. When people think that they've, perhaps you've done more work or you've done less work than the original compensation structure intimated, then there's a conversation about that and it gets adjusted. So it's very, very different. It's radically transparent. But one of the things that made me, I'm going to say, a little bit furious about traditional consulting firms was that you had these bright young people that were there doing the work and just putting in so many hours every week, and they weren't receiving a share of compensation that really reflected the work that they were doing. The idea is that you give these companies your best years and they juice the life out of you, and then maybe there's partnership at the end of the rainbow. And I think that's foolish. That's not a lasting model. I want those good, energetic people to come. I want them to stay. And I want them to be happy and compensated for doing their best work and putting in their best years with us. I'm happy when people want to be here, and I want them to be here. So I think there's a give and take in that. And that was another thing that when we started doing it, I didn't really think about it as being radical, but I knew that I didn't like the status quo.
So, as a leader, what is your team, and tell me about the size of your company.
So we are 6 consultants, and then a person who works on the IT side, our IT support folks who are absolutely phenomenal. And we've grown very slowly, very organically. I think that it's one of the funny things about our model, and that's one of the questions that I get often is, does it scale? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I know that we've had very stable, slow growth in terms of our team, in terms of our operations. Could we go to being a 100-person team with the same type of model within a year? I think you'd have to manage that very carefully. And it's not where my interest lives.
Working with technology companies, how is that?
It's amazing. I think that it's fun. It's different. I feel like with tech companies, probably more than anywhere else in the world, and I'll give a big shout out to Capital One Bank, which is my former employer and the most fun I've had working for anyone other than myself. At Capital One Bank, there was a kind of a cultural value called 5 whys, which is the idea that if you really want to understand something, you have to ask why at least 5 times. So not just why do we collect KYC? Because the regulation says so. Well, why does the regulation say so? And what does the regulation really say? So you want to get those 5 layers deep in order to have an in-depth understanding. And that was the first environment that I was in work-wise, where as a compliance person, I would get challenged a lot. The marketing team, the engineering teams, the tech news stories, why? And you couldn't just say, well, because the law says so. That was not culturally acceptable. You weren't living the values at that point. And so I think that's really helped form what I think those conversations should be. And I feel like especially with tech companies, they want that. They will be the people, your tech entrepreneurs who have gone, they have read the regulation, and then they're coming into a meeting saying, well, I read the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing Act, and in section 36 sub 9, it says this, and da-da-da-da-da, and this is what I think I want to do to solve based on that. Does that work? And if it doesn't work, why doesn't it work? And if it doesn't work, what would work instead? And they are there for it. They want to understand the source underlying materials, and they want to find novel solutions to those problems. They want to find things that work within their environment while serving their customers, while reducing friction, while working within their UI UX models. And I think that's fantastic. I think we need more of that. I think that's great for us as consumers, and we should want that. Everyone should want that. So it's fabulous to work with.
So bringing solutions for different companies which belongs to different industries, and talking with different entrepreneurs. There must be a strong understanding for you, or a great skill in you to make this to bring solutions for problems which belongs to different industries. What is that?
I think that's listening a lot of the time. I think it's listening, remembering not to assume, remembering not to get too caught up in my own ego, and asking questions. And I think for anyone who's on the consulting side or the service delivery side, you should be asking more questions than speaking most of the time, especially in that initial call with someone, because you want to understand what their business is and what they're actually trying to accomplish. In my world, I actually think the funniest conversations that I have sometimes is that someone will call and they'll say, well, I'm doing this. I need an AML program. And we'll start talking through what their business is actually doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And sometimes the answer is that's not actually what they need. And their model isn't really something that's regulated in that way or isn't really something that they need to do that way. And we wouldn't get there if we didn't listen. It would be easy to say, okay, here, let me write you a proposal. You will give me thousands of dollars. I will give you a compliance program that you don't need. And maybe 2 years down the line, you'll realize that you didn't need it, but which is just incredibly unsatisfying for everyone. And so I think listening, if there's any superpower that I would recommend, it's listening and trying to build that deep understanding.
So before 2013, before starting your company or the idea, before implementing this idea, what are those experiences before 2013 that are helping today to solve the problems?
So I think definitely working in-house. I think working with companies that have been enthusiastic about technology was really important. And honestly, I think working with a bigger consulting firm where I didn't like the culture and I didn't like the way that it was set up and I didn't feel like it was, that it was transparent and that it was fair to folks was helpful as well, because it gave me a really good sense of what I did not want to build and what I didn't want to be. It's really easy for us to go and replicate the same models and do the same things. And I think there's this equal importance in understanding what we do want to build, but also what we don't want to build and what parts of things that we don't want to just roll out because we've always done it that way and it's proven, but maybe it's also proven to be ugly.
And why you do whatever you do?
Because it's interesting. I think that it's interesting feels like such a big driver to me. I think problem solving motivates the heck out of me. Helping businesses, helping entrepreneurs really motivates me. And I think that the companies that we're working with are a net good in the world, that they're bringing products to market, that they're doing things that help people. And I'm really proud to be a part of that.
So we are bringing solutions for different problems that belongs to different businesses. So how much time you take? Tell me about your ability.
So I think it really depends on the business and what they need. And that's another piece of the asking questions, is that when a business comes into us, we're scoping what the things are that they need, what they have the capacity to take on at any point in time. And we always want that to be an evolution. I think the other interesting thing that we have philosophically is that I think that as a consultant, I shouldn't be doing the same things for you in 5 years that I'm doing for you right now. So when you come into me as a startup, maybe I'm building your policies and procedures and risk assessment. So I'm building up that whole compliance documentation. But as you grow, you get an in-house compliance person. They revise a whole bunch of it, as they should. And they're tailoring that to their way of doing things, to their processes. The company is evolving, things are changing. And at that point, you might call me when you have a regulatory examination. You might call me when you want to bounce ideas around and you have a particularly nuanced problem that you want to solve. But it's very different. I'm not doing those exact same things at every point in time. And I think that's a fairly important evolution, and something that I think about a lot is how do we grow that? How do we grow the capacity within those teams? How do we make sure that we're teaching, that we're passing on that knowledge? And that's something that we're very passionate about. We have a content rule on our team. You might be too young, but do you know the movie Beetlejuice?
No.
It's an old Michael Keaton movie. I don't even know if I'd recommend it at this point, but it's goofy. So he's basically like this ghost guy, and his name is Beetlejuice. And if you say his name 3 times, he shows up. He just like poof, he appears. So we call it the Beetlejuice rule, where basically when we're thinking about content, if we get the same question 3 times, we try to write a piece of content about it. So we're either writing an article, we're doing a video, we're doing a conference presentation. Because if 3 people have had the same question, lots of that industry has the same question. And we want to make sure that we're answering it and getting it out there. We'll also reach out. So there are times where the question is something it's not really in our wheelhouse. It's not really what we do. So maybe it's a question that's specific to fraud, and we'll call up a fraud practice that we know who's fantastic, who does great content, and we'll say, hey, we're getting a lot of this question. Do you have any content on that? Do you want to collab on that content? There's this conference coming up. Maybe you should present at that. There's this opportunity to do some video content. And we'll just look for those opportunities in terms of getting content out there that really helps solve the problems that people want solved.
And what size of businesses that you work for?
So the businesses
what is the size that businesses has that you are working with?
There's a huge amount of variance. There are businesses that we work with that are mom and pop shops, so they're micro in scale, and there are businesses that we work with that have thousands of employees.
So how you impacted their businesses?
It really depends on the project and what the business needs at the time. But I think in any of those cases, we really aim to bring that deep knowledge and expertise and to be able to bridge a gap that isn't there within the team at that point in time. So with a smaller business, like I said, often starting off, it's this whole big build. Whereas with a larger, more advanced business, it might be a specific nuanced problem. It might be an audit. It might be going through something that they're needing to backfill a certain skill set on their team, or they're needing to understand what industry is doing around a certain issue. And so it tends to be a lot more nuanced and a lot more narrow in terms of the scope and scale of what we're doing with a bigger business.
And what are challenges in your role?
I think not having enough hours in the day. That sounds funny, I guess, but it always feels like there's more that I could be doing. I could always be writing more content. I could always be doing more in any case. And I think that's always a challenge, just figuring out the timing, figuring out the prioritization. Fortunately, I love what I'm doing. And so I think that's a very good thing. But the challenge is just fitting in everything that I want to do.
So how do you choose your team?
So as a baseline, they have to have that 10,000 hours. So that's just as far as I'm concerned, table stakes. Beyond that, I think we're a small team. We're a very nimble team. We have to like each other. There's a couple of business books that I adore, and one of them is called, is it okay if I swear a little? There's a swear in the title of the book. Okay, so it's called The No Assholes Rule, which I think is a fantastic book. And I feel like it's also lessons that I've learned the hard way, in a way. So when you hire, and the premise is that you can hire someone and they can be a superstar, but if they're an absolute jerk to everyone around them, then they actually kill productivity. So they end up hurting productivity on their team, even though they themselves might have high sales or high production or whatever. Your overall team loses, and that's problematic. The other one that I really like, which I think is the inverse of that, is called give and take. And so give and take talks about the idea that in the long term, we're more successful when we're willing to have this give and take in relationships. So it's not just constantly about the me, it's about, that whole. And so I think those are things that I definitely look for. I look for the ability to think on the fly. So, we do behavior-based interviewing, which is that, tell me about a situation where you had a challenge, or tell me about a situation where da-da-da. So we're looking for those concrete examples. And then I give people a horrible assignment. And the horrible assignment is that I give them a set of policies and procedures, and it's incomplete, so there's stuff missing from it, but it's 200 pages long. So there's no way that you're reading it in the 30 minutes I give you. And what I say is there are 5, pretty significant things that are missing. I want you to tell me what those are, but you have 30 minutes. So, look at this and tell me what you think of it. And what I'm looking for isn't that you're able to synthesize and necessarily pull out what those 5 things are. I think 4 out of 5 is like the best that I've ever had someone do, and it was absolutely incredible. But what I'm looking for is, how do you communicate with me? How do you think on your feet? how do you approach that problem when you have the impossible problem? How are you synthesizing information? How are you thinking about it? And I think those things are very telling. And then how are you dealing with the stress of that? Because that's a funny, very common request that we get from clients, is that someone will give us this massive set of documents and within the context of this very short meeting say, but are they good? Like, how are they? How are we doing? How are our documents? My friend, you have given me 200 pages. I'm not sure where on this half an hour call I was to read those, but I have to be able to at least do some things to look at those and start to comment and start to have a meaningful conversation about that and synthesize that information and understand what they're looking for. So I think that process, as stressful as it probably is, and for everyone who's applied with me, thank you for going through that process. But I think it's very telling.
And tell me reason for your productivity.
Um, I think a lot of it is need. So regulatory things will have a lot of timelines. Part of that particular case as well that's important is sometimes we're dealing with regulatory exams, and we don't necessarily. So you have 30 days to provide things to a regulator. We're not necessarily hired on day one. Sometimes people realize they need outside help on day 15, and so now we have this 2-week timeline to help pull everything together and get them what they need and present themselves in their regulatory context in the best light. And so they can be super stressful situations. I find those incredibly stressful, but also very motivating because I want to help these businesses. I think they're great. I want to present them in the best light. I want to help them understand what they're walking into. And so I think that timing for me is very motivating, and just doing the best for these businesses is very motivating for me.
And the compliances and regulations keeps on changing. So how you are able to update yourself and give the right advice for your client?
So I think it's partly participating in industry groups. It's reading. So this is like a 100-page document, a consultation that came out recently. And I have a tendency to print them out and start, putting in Post-its. So these are various industry associations that I work with to be able to say, here's where I think those points of interest are. But I think always being involved, paying attention to those consultations, reading the source when it comes out. When there's new regulation, we tend to make, or changes to existing regulation, but we tend to make red lines, which is to say we'll go through it and kind of cross out the parts that have been removed, add in color the parts that have been added so that it's really visual and easy to see. And we actually publish those. That's another one. If there's anyone from government listening to this podcast and you want a great idea that can help industry, when you release changes to regulation, give us that marked up version so that we can see what's changed. It's super helpful. You would not believe how many people download this from our website, but governments of the world, they could be downloading them from your site, and I think that would be better, ultimately. There we go. Thank you for letting me be on a soapbox for a minute.
So as a founder, as a business owner, do you observe regulations and compliances from other parts of the world which belong the businesses which belongs to other countries?
We do. So our practice is very specialized to Canada, but we have partners in other countries around the world that we work with. And I think that's really important because business is global. Regulation is incredibly local, but business is very global. And you have to understand how those regulations in different jurisdictions interact.
So how you are able to give solutions for those businesses which are into multiple countries?
When it comes to compliance, depending on what area you're working in, if you're developing, I think there's a difference between developing a financial application. So if you're doing something that touches people's money versus if you are developing a relatively straightforward video game that doesn't involve managing people's funds. Very, very different in terms of the regulation. So you really have to understand what applies to you, where you are, where your customers are. And part of what we do with folks is help them go through that analysis to say, what is it that you're actually deploying? What are your goals? So what does that roadmap look like? Because I think it's really important. If I say I'm doing a really straightforward video game, but the answer is really that in 2 years from now, what I'm looking for is doing the gamification of money and a way for to pay kids their allowance and different things like that. That's a very different story than a straightforward video game. And the latter part of that is actually touched by regulation and financial regulation. So you have to understand what the goal is, what that ideal outcome is, and then where they are, where their customers or intended customers are, and what that looks like. And sometimes, especially in the financial world, that means that for the founders, they have to go back and think about it in terms of what jurisdictions they want to expand into, because the regulation can be too complicated to do everything everywhere all at once. If I have a limited budget, saying that I want to have a bank that operates in every country in the world, that's problematic. That's very complicated, very serious regulation if you get it wrong. And so you'll start with one country or one jurisdiction within a country and then expand outwards from there.
So what are the common mistakes or commonalities that most of the businesses are not aware of?
I think one of the things that I would say, especially for startups, is please talk to your legal and compliance people before you build your tech stack. That it's so much easier if you're thinking about, what data do I have to collect? How do I have to be able to extract it? How do I have to be able to store it? What does that look like at the beginning of your process than to have built your entire tech stack and then at the end realize that you have to do KYC, but you have no storage, you have no encryption, you don't know how to deal with personal information, you have no plans to collect the fields of data that you need to collect. So all of those things get really complicated when they're rework, but when they're part of your plan in building out your system, that's a much better, much happier place to be.
So you're doing very important work for any business that needs to have for sure. So how you're doing this? What is making you to do this 100%, honestly and perfectly?
I think the stakes are high. So everything that we do is in a regulated world. We want to see companies succeed. We want to see companies manage their risk appropriately. And we treat that with the utmost respect, as we should. I think that one of the things that I emphasize in my team is that it's very much okay for us to say, I don't know. And so there are times where we will get very nuanced and novel questions. We don't know the answer. There are times where we will get questions that are outside of our wheelhouse. And so I'll get questions that are about securities law or estates law or something that just isn't the core of what we do. So it's incredibly important for us to be able to acknowledge that we don't have an immediate answer to that question, and then network and bring in the right professionals that are able to answer those questions to the fullest.
So as a person who is into this profession and providing this service, do you ever thought that before having this kind of a social environment or so, we as a social species doing this in the world, what was before this society?
Oh, so I think we've always had, formally or informally, just as societies, we've had rules and regulations that were communicated in different ways. I think there are beautiful things that happen with technology and transparency, which are that everyone can see very clearly what the rules are and make decisions about their risks and how they follow those rules. I think that's fantastic. I do think that we're moving to a very different place in terms of all of the information being available at our fingertips all of the time, and that's fantastic. Um, I can certainly recall early on in my journey in compliance, because I started in 2001. It was the nascent days of the internet. Processes weren't super technology based. And so I started off in dealer compliance, and we would have people sending in their license, so a copy of their license on a fax machine. And then I would have to read it and make sure that, okay, this is the same person who matches what's in our IT systems. I'm either granting them access to do certain things or not based on the data that they've provided. But it was sometimes painful. It was very much not instantaneous. Systems were not interoperable. We had a woman whose job was to update the address and phone number information across 15 different IT systems. because the company had bought other companies over the years. And so there was this glut of different IT systems. And in the summer, she got two co-op students from the University of Waterloo who were excited to learn that they would be working on financial IT systems until they realized that what they were doing was just keying in names and addresses across 15 different systems for 8 hours a day. And I think we've moved on to a pretty incredible place since then, just in terms of the amount of productivity that we can have and what we can do and what we can access at the push of a button, which is phenomenal. And from a risk management perspective, it's phenomenal that we can have these very in-depth data views and risk management views.
So Twitter, the head of the Twitter, Elon Musk, is allowing human beings to say whatever they want, whatever they feel on their platform, and there is so much data that is being generated after he coming and taking away. So what do you think? How this change is going to impact the planet?
So that's always a really interesting one. And I think there's some nuanced issues there, including data that's not actual human generated data. So we have a lot of bot generated data and bots that do various things, from advertising cryptocurrency scams to spreading hate speech to being programmed to try to influence elections. And I think one of our challenges in the modern world is really to be able to parse out and figure out what's that human generated data and what's not, what's the truth and what's not, what's the relevant data and what's not, because there is a lot of noise.
So is it easy for you to understand the real world and the virtual world and connect both?
I don't think that's always easy for any of us, but we all try our best on that score, and it's always about how do we get to a better, more nuanced understanding? How do we manage the risk? How do we protect ourselves from things that are scams? And for me, that goes to whether that's protecting companies that are my clients that are managing the risk, to protecting myself and my loved ones. Because certainly here we see, especially with seniors, there are a lot of scam targets that occur. I think my mom probably gets more friend requests on Facebook than anyone else I know. And we have to have a lot of talks about how many of these might be bots or scams or various things. Because to her, she looks at it and she says, "Oh, look, Ellen DeGeneres just sent me a Facebook request." And I have to explain, like, that's probably not Ellen DeGeneres, Mom. And you probably don't have and I'm not laughing at my mom. I love her. She's wonderful. But she's 80 and she also doesn't have the skill set to parse out, is this necessarily a real person or not a real person? And what is the motivation? And what kind of data am I leaking that might put me in some kind of danger in this situation?
So there is so much energy has been created because of your presence on this planet. And how responsible you feel about it?
I would say very much so. Very much so. We should all be responsible.
So I mean, how conscious you are?
Like do you mean from
In
an environmental goals
any,
perspective?
yeah, in doing business and in doing in communicating with various business leaders.
Oh, I think very much so. So as a company, we don't actually fall into the category where we're required to do ESG reports, but we're a vendor. And so we've just, actually gone through and done our first ESG report. And I think it's a funny thing because it's so deeply ingrained in our culture as a company and as a team, that there were a lot of things that, even though we hadn't been measuring them formally, when we started to look at what we were doing and where our formal measurements fell, we were doing incredibly well. And that was, I'm not going to say it was a surprise, but it was definitely pleasant. It was a very pleasant feeling when we were going through the process.
And what are your values and that the compliances and the regulation that you put for yourself to make everything go well?
I think that radical honesty, that radical transparency, um, and really trying to find the wins for everyone, trying to find the things that help companies both follow what they need to do from a regulatory perspective, manage their risk, and build resilient businesses. And I think the challenge of looking for those wins makes it worth it every day.
So can you help people or entrepreneurs or the businesses which belongs to different countries?
So we would only work with companies that were looking to have a nexus to Canada. But if you were in another jurisdiction and you're looking for folks to partner with, then we'll happily connect you to any of our partners that we know are awesome in those jurisdictions.
I hope you reach everywhere in the world soon.
Thank you.
So as a leader, as a person, as a visionary, as a person who makes things happen, what is your observation about my work?
I think that it's really neat. I think that so getting to 4,000 interviews is going to be really fascinating. I'm curious to see where it branches out and where the interest takes you and what you do with the data analysis at the end of it. Because I think you're going to have this really phenomenal amount of interesting data. Um, and if it's ever of interest, I have a friend who actually teaches entrepreneurship at Western University that I think might have some interesting ideas just about how to think about the data collection and what you might want to do with it. But I'm interested to see both your journey and the synthesis along the way. So what are those types? What are those patterns that you're noticing? And what stays interesting for you?
Like I asked you a simple question before, what was before this social thing and society? So I'm
Mhm.
doing what was the communication system before the society and the societal rules and regulations. So that is just a connection between humans. So if you ask me that deeper question like about data, I'm into IT. I'm a DevOps guy. I know I'm aware of it, but what I feel is we created these rules and regulations for ourselves in order to make things not go wrong. Uh, but
Yeah.
actually, but actually, if we as a human beings able to believe each other heartfully, honestly, these papers and these materialistic things, I don't think it is very important. But my intention is to create a positive energy, positive environment, send a message to the world, to the planet, who belongs to different industries and who are into different professions. Let's be kind, nice, and be good to each other, respect, and let's be neutral and take the world as it is. So just trying to put an observation. I'm not endorsing anything. I'm not saying like do this.
Okay.
Just trying
But
to put.
I love that. I love the positivity.
So I interviewed Amazon Web Services Vice President. I also asked this question to him, uh, uh, being in technology for 30 plus years. So you are responsible today for the data centers, Amazon data centers, the global infrastructure that you have. So what you are going to do because we don't know we can't assure about the natural disasters in different places. So anything can happen to the data. So are you ready for the destruction or whatever happens? And the simple answer he said to me is, we can't give assurance for anything in the world. We don't know what happens. We are aware of like our goal or our plan is to just for 5 years. Until 5 years we have a plan for what to do, but after that we cannot think beyond because we don't know what happens until it happens. So not thinking much deeper about what is going to happen in future, just having a small goals in order to reach there and taking the team there to solve the problem. So about the data that I asked him, so he said that. So
Mhm.
yeah, and also I'm taking the permission of all the people uh, I'm interviewing. Can I use this video to put on my YouTube channel, on social media, and on all my platforms, if it is
Oh,
okay for them?
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I will take that. So that's my answer for your question.
Fair. Well, I look forward to watching.
So I think something is working for me. If I'm creating something, a global regulation or global policy, if we call in the paper terms or paper vocabulary, can be policy or regulation. It is before logic. We have an emotion. Every logic comes from an emotion. So emotionally connecting, I think that is helping. So how do you think, I'm a technology guy. This is my last question. So how do you think this energy that me communicating with different country people who are into different professions and who are into different levels in their businesses, and also I interviewed founders like you who are having different companies in different parts of the world. What I'm going to learn and how I'm going to use this knowledge in my job.
Ooh, that's a great question. So I think that all knowledge is worth having. And sometimes I'm surprised, even in my own life, at things that will come up where maybe it's something that my grandmother told me when I was a kid that helps me do something in business in my 40s, or it's something that I learned from just having a conversation with someone that ends up being incredibly useful in a challenging situation down the line. And so I think following those threads and having those conversations with people around the world is going to help elevate your career. It's going to help elevate your life. It's going to help you understand and navigate challenging situations in novel ways, and hopefully synthesize some of those things and bring them together in novel ways. So not just repeating what someone has said, but maybe bringing 5 different pieces of conversations together into a novel configuration that actually helps you solve a problem in a new way. And I think that is what we should all be striving for.
So I'll save this feedback and I'll look at every time when I feel like looking at it.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't see it. We don't see it until years later what the true value of a particular conversation was, and that it ends up being incredibly impactful in our lives.
Great. Thanks for your presence, Amber. Thanks for giving me opportunity to present to you and the service that you're providing, the problems that you're solving. Thanks for sharing it, and thanks for answering some of my questions, and thanks for being inspirational to a lot of people who watches this.
And thank you to you as well. This is very much a two-way street. So when I talk about things like learning, I feel like I'm learning a lot from you in this conversation as well. And the work that you're doing is really cool. Thank you so much for letting me be part of it.
So can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Oh yes, please do. You have my permission.
And also, can I share this video on my podcast, video and audio clip on my podcast website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes, permission granted.
Thank you very much, Amber. Keep going.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.